research if you're not going to determine whether or not this is permissible in your deen. I'm not talking about permissibility. I'm talking about taking the proper approach to addressing these issues. If you're just going to do it on your own, you're not going to ask somebody who knows the religion, knows the tradition, knows the fiqh, and you're just going to do it for the sake of convenience, do it for the sake of increasing your following, do it for the sake of attracting more people, then you're obviously opening up a can of worms and you're obviously opening up the door to fitna. That's not the way to go about it. You're going to have to end up compromising on things that Islam has absolutely granted you no permission to compromise on. Okay, we're talking about LGBTQ.
Right.
Okay, we condemn the lifestyle. It's something which is completely impermissible in our deen. We don't make judgments about people. What people do in their private lives is nobody else's business. That's between them and Allah. Okay, this is like an addiction. This is like some type of test that they are battling with. Okay, but for us to come out and say that, okay, we want to make sure that you are treated like a human being, you have your civil rights, and you have all of that. That's not what we're against. What we're saying is that now this person, okay, we are condoning or we are approving of the choices that they're making, the indiscretions that they may be within our religion. You're going to compromise on one thing today, you're going to have to compromise on another thing tomorrow. After 50 years, after 10 years, after 5 years, after 1 year, basically the deen and what's halal or haram is going to end up becoming irrelevant for you.
I think
what are you going to be left with?
The problem is kind of synonymous, right? Like you have a brother who comes in and, you know, you might not know what he's doing on his weekends. You might not know that he's an alcoholic. You might not know that he's addicted to pot. But he comes in and, you know, he comes into MSA and he kind of has a new identity. And that, I think, plays into the good side of MSA, right? That you come in with a clean slate. You might be the world's greatest sinner, but you go to Fajr at the masjid and you come to clean your plate off, right? And I think with the LGBTQ community, the same thing kind of applies, right? Like if you go in there and no one knows about your, you know, what would we call that? Your preferences. And you come in there and you're, you know, praying with everyone, you're acting normal, then no one would know, like, you know, you're not publicizing your sin. But the problem, I think, which is more prevalent now, is that people are coming there very openly saying, this is who I am, and you need to make room for me in terms of what I do as being accepted. Not room for me as a human, right? Because that's understood as something in Islam, like you just said, Mufti, that, you know, we don't judge you, we you know, don't condone the act. Right, so when people start to associate themselves very strongly and say this needs to be made okay, I think that's where we start to butt heads and we see MSAs dealing with this. Like, what do I do?
And here's the thing, right? Like you have these MSAs, and the good thing about a local masajid, right, is a masajid has rules, right? There is by default some sort of gender separation by default because you have to pray behind one another, right? There is by default, you know, a level of this is a sacred space. We're not going to talk about, you know, the latest, you know, episode of, you know, the Daredevil or something on it, right? There's just some level of sacredness in it, right? Whereas the MSA is associated with a secular organization, university, right? It's just like a kumbaya of you know, of you got different demographics of people. You have people on like varying levels of Islam. You got people on different aqidah. You got people on different sexuality. You have all kinds of people here, and it's just like this big kumbaya. How do you, like, you know, balance this? Because it's just crazy now. I think you were telling me before, Haris, where it's like, you know, people will start having discussions about, oh, you know, there'll be roundtable discussions between males and females, and people are talking about either coming out of the closet or they're talking about losing their faith, or one guy's like on some other angle and he's talking about being super religious, and some other guy just hates the opposite gender. Like, there's just people who are coming from all different angles at an MSA, and how do you like corral these people together?
Two things. One is the law is the law. All right, this happens all the time. Young person comes up to me and says, Mufti, I got class, I can't make it for Jummah. I said, look, you're an adult, sane, free male. You fulfill the criteria for Jummah. You have to come for Jummah. It's a sin to skip Jummah, and it's a sin to skip other parts of the deen as well. That being said, you don't pray Jummah. That's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't make it right, and muftis, we don't make things halal and we don't make things haram. We show you and we explain to you and we put in front of you what the law says. Second point is, though, if a person has, you know, a preference when it comes to LGBTQ, has that type of indiscretion that they have to deal with, that doesn't make them a bad person.
Absolutely not, right.
That doesn't make them anything. That is something that they have to battle with.
It's a sin.
all right?
It's a sin just as any other sin.
It's
Exactly.
similar to, a person who's addicted to watching pornography, a person who's addicted to drinking, a person who is involved in any other thing which is haram. Okay,
Right.
and if we look at our lives objectively and if we point fingers at ourselves, yes, there's a lot of things that we are doing which are maybe not as bad or maybe even worse, right? That we could, put ourselves on the spot for it.
I think it was you that was telling me before where the sin of zina, right, is the sin itself. Whether that's a zina with a man or a woman, it's all under the same label. You committed the same sin, right?
Right.
The problem is you just cannot get married to, someone of the same gender. Otherwise, there is no. You're just a sinner, just like everybody else, right? There's no preferential treatment or impreferential treatment, outside of that.
Right. Unfortunately, we have now kind of convoluted when we talk about, should they be treated differently, or should they have the same civil rights, or should we champion them, or should we, protest for them? Look, that comes from a whole culture of ignorance and a whole culture of taboo that is obviously completely un-Islamic to start off with. We don't treat people differently because of them being involved in a particular sin.
Right.
Right? Unfortunately, if that happens in MSA, then I'd be the first person to call that out. We don't treat people differently because they happen to commit that type of a sin, or even if they're not properly observing the hijab, or even if they're not properly dressing up when they're praying salah.
The unfortunate reality is that a lot of people don't like these Muslim circles because of those same reasons. That it's I can't tell you the number of times I've heard a guy saying, "I don't come to MSA because they judge me because I'm a part of a fraternity," or they judge me because I have an earring, even, or for sisters the hijab one is something you hear on and on again.
Right.
And I can't emphasize how important what you just said is.
The people who are in these positions making decisions at MSA and organizing, and the ones who basically create these cliques, they should be trying to eliminate these cliques, but they're the ones who are pioneering and promoting these cliques subtly, unintentionally. They have to be held accountable. They have to be educated, and they have to be told to, behave when it comes to the way they talk. They have to learn adab, and they have to be people who have some sound knowledge of the deen, okay? Be able to appreciate what our tradition has to offer and how we deal with these issues. These are issues that are not going to go away. We live in a country where these issues now are going to be exponentially, exaggerated over, the next... We're living in this generation where it's in front of our eyes, okay? If you look at MSA 40, 50 years ago, they had different types of issues that they had to deal with.
Right.
This is a very, very serious issue that we have to deal with. And if we are compromising in our values, if we don't go back to what guidance our deen has given us, then you're going to alienate a person not just from the MSA, not just from the masjid, but from the deen altogether.